Hello, and this is Kurokami, and I'm back for yet another Junji Ito review. And before I get into this one, just real quick, I want to thank everyone who has been watching my videos recently. It really means a lot to me. Like, the last episode got over 400 views, and that's a lot for me, so I really want to thank you all for that. Oh, and also I have some news at the end of the video for anyone who cares. I'm going to wait for after the review to do that. But anyway, like I said, always, spoiler warning is in effect. I'm going over the whole episode. But let's do something interesting this time. Let's start a conversation in the comment section below. Tell me, out of all of the episodes you've seen so far, as in individual stories, what has been your favorite? I would like to know. But man, do I have to tell you guys, the music in this episode at least was amazing. I will talk more about it when we get to the parts later on, but my gosh, if there was one thing in this episode that stood out the most, it was the soundtrack. Great. Okay, so today's episode goes over, yet again, two stories, and the first one being The Intersection's Pretty Boy and Slug Girl. So the first story, The Intersection's Pretty Boy, covers three main characters, Ryusuke, Midori, and Reishi. Okay, since the anime skips the beginning of the manga, I'm going to briefly go over the first part of the manga real quick. So it begins with a girl going to an intersection in the town, and it's common belief in this town that on foggy nights, you go to an intersection and you wait for the first person who comes by, and that person, you ask them your fortune, and whatever they say is going to be what happens. So a lot of young people like to do it, especially middle school and high school kids, and they always go to ask about their love life. So this girl is waiting, and this man comes up, and he talks to her, and she's like, "Oh, well, am I going to find love?" And the man laughs because he knows about these rumors already, and he tells her, "You'll find love, it's okay." And then now it skips to our main protagonist, and him and his mother are in the train, and they are heading back to their home village. They had moved away, but they're coming back because of their father's work. So they pretty much describe like how it's always foggy here, it's so dense. So anyway, he goes to school, and the anime picks up about right here where it introduced Ryusuke to his class, and Ryusuke was very upset at first because he didn't want to be here because he had a bad experience, which I'll discuss in a little bit. But yeah, and he goes to class, and so many people remember him from elementary school, and they're talking to him, and he doesn't remember most of them, but he starts feeling better with his friends. And that's where Midori comes in, and she says, "Hey, do you remember me?" And he's like, "Oh wow, yeah, I do." So they kick it off, and they don't really discuss it, but apparently they start going out. It doesn't say really in the anime or the manga that they are officially going out, but they very much hint at it. So Midori decides to introduce Ryusuke to her best friend, Reishi, and they talk and talk, and Reishi's always pushing for Midori, always wants the best for Midori. So she kind of just says how all the boys flock over Midori, and of course Midori gets flattered, and she's like, "Oh, stop it, he's going to start thinking bad things about me." And then they start talking about the intersection fortune telling, the whole premise of this whole story. And for some reason, this really does not sit well with Ryusuke. He gets actually angry at them, and he tells them straight up, "You shouldn't be doing this," and he literally leaves them. Okay, now this next scene is actually kind of interesting because this next scene of the manga was actually the opening scene of the anime. And in the manga, the first girl who talked to the man and he said, "You're going to do fine," turns out she had a wonderful relationship. But in the anime, that never happened, so they kind of just jumped straight to it. So yeah, so it shows this other girl from a different school, and she's looking for love, and she goes to the intersection on a foggy night, and yeah, she sees what they call the pretty boy. He's a very mysterious man, and yet he's so good looking apparently. And she asks him, am I going to find love? And he says, no, it's not going to bear any fruit. She's devastated. But guess what happens? She kills herself in the intersection by slitting her throat with a pool of blood surrounding her entire body. So now she's the talk of the school. And then Ryusuke hears the news, and it conjures a terrible past event for him. When he was a child, he one time got into a fight with his parents because they were saying they're moving, and he didn't want to move. He loved his life there. He had friends, and he didn't want to go to a new town where he knew no one. So he ran out, and this woman was playing the intersection fortune-telling game, and she was waiting for the first person to come up to her, and it happened to be Ryusuke, a 12-year-old boy who's in a pissy mood. And now this girl's screws were a little bit loose. She kind of just goes a little crazy right off the bat and says, boy, hey boy, which by the way in the anime was so much better than the manga, because they really make her sound a little more creepier in the anime versus what Junji was able to do in the manga. She tells Ryusuke that she's pregnant, and she's pregnant with a man who's already in a marriage with kids. And she says, I love him, but he doesn't love me, and he's telling me to even get an abortion. How cruel is that? And she's like, what should I do? Should I give up on him, or should I not? What should I do? And because Ryusuke is in a bad mood and he thinks this whole thing's stupid anyway, he pretty much tells her that like hell it will, and calls her an idiot as he runs away. And he remembers looking back and seeing the expression on her face, and he couldn't sleep that night. So finally the next day he decided to go back to see what happened. She had killed herself. She had slit her throat. It was Ryusuke's fault. He was the last crutch that she had in this world. She just needed somebody to tell her it was going to be okay, don't give up. But because of Ryusuke's immature behavior, she died. And he could never forget that, and it haunts him to this day. And then some really bad news happens. Midori comes up to Ryusuke, and she obviously knows he's having issues. He's not wanting to talk to her, and she's just like, why? And she's like, I realize that you got upset about the, when we brought up the fortune telling. Does it bother you? And it obviously bothers him because, you know, of what I just told you, his past. And he tries to play it off cool, saying, no, it's fine. And then this is when Midori tells him a little secret. She says, I don't like it either because my aunt died 10 years ago because of fortune telling. It was only a matter of seconds before Ryusuke could connect the dots. He killed Midori's aunt. Yeah, life can be cruel, can't it? Midori is devastated. She's like, is our relationship even going to work out? What can I do? And she's talking to Reishi, and she's asking her, like, what should I do? Does he even like me anymore? He doesn't want to spend time with me. Like I said before, Reishi is very supportive of Midori. She's willing to help Midori out in any way she can. So she's like, tell you what, I'm going to talk to him for you. I'm going to make sure that that whatever this issue is, it's going to get resolved. So she decides to meet up with Ryusuke, and she starts asking, what's the matter? Midori loves you, and she feels like you don't love her. What's going on? And he's obviously having a meltdown because of what just happened. And he tells her, please don't ask me anymore. I don't deserve love. I don't even deserve to speak, let alone be with Midori. And eventually Reishi gives up, and she's like, okay, if that's how you feel, I'll tell her. But then Reishi is like, wait, there's one more step I can take. And she decides, let's go to the fortune telling. So she waits, and it's, of course, a foggy day. And guess who shows up? Mr. Pretty Boy. and very nervous because of just his bone-chilling exterior. She decides to speak up, and she asks him, "My best friend is having an issue with her boyfriend. Can they solve this? Will they be happy?" And he kind of snickers at her and says, "You should be worrying about your love life." That gets her to thinking. So then we skip, and she's talking to Midori, and she's like, "Yeah, I'm sorry, but he wants to break up with you." And Midori is obviously crushed. But then Reishi like, "I went to the fortune teller. I saw the pretty boy, and I asked him about you guys." And at the second, Midori is like, "Oh wow, you went through all of that for me?" And Reishi's like, "Yeah, but he told me something. What about my love?" And then I realized, I'm sorry Midori, but I love Ryusuke. And it's actually a good thing that you guys broke up, because now I'm gonna go ask him out. Then she just starts going freaking tsundere crazy almost. She is up Ryusuke's butt every second, and he tries to let her down in roundabout ways, kind of just nudging, "Hey, stop," but she doesn't. Finally, one day comes and Ryusuke's leaving his house, and of course, Reishi's standing out there, and her features have obviously changed. She has become a little less human. She goes so far as in, when he tells her that he already has a bento, she grabs his bag and says, "I'll eat it, take my food." And Ryusuke knocks her to the ground, and he tells her, "Okay, I'll tell you straight up, I don't love you." And Reishi's just in disbelief, and she tells him, "I love you, Ryusuke. I love you to death." Well, things still don't go better. Even after Ryusuke was so cruel to Reishi, that wasn't enough to stop her love. No, she could only continue. So that day, she follows him home from school like usual, but Ryusuke's been thinking. He's realized he's been a little bit of a mean guy to her. He feels like he went overboard, so he apologizes to her, but he tells her that, "I do love Midori. There's no way I will ever go out with you." She's crying, and he's like, "You want to know what? Let me tell you the truth, why all this is happening." And just as he goes to explain, Reishi pulls out an X-Acto knife, slits her throat wide open. Not one, but now 2 women. Ryusuke is responsible for their death. Ryusuke has had it at this point. He decides he's going to find this pretty boy and put an end to this finally. So now this part actually was not in the anime, this is a manga exclusive, but he actually decides to get a map and point out where all of these deaths have happened. And he draws a basic circle, and guess where the center of that circle is? It's where Ryusuke talked to the pregnant woman and she died. It's all surrounding that event. Coincidence? I think not. So Ryusuke decides to find this pretty boy, and he's walking around, and several people are playing this game. Despite the warnings, they still want to play with death. They still want to know if their love will come true. So Ryusuke takes this as an opportunity. I'm gonna foil this guy. I'm gonna give nothing but good advice and good fortunes to anyone who comes to me. And so he does. Every man, every woman he comes across, he helps them the best as he can. He's starting to feel better about himself, but he still wants to catch this pretty boy. But then shit starts getting a little crazy as he sees another girl, and being excited to go help her out, he runs over to her, only to find out, yeah, she's dead. Covered in blood. Just covered. He realizes that after seeing the gashes on her neck, this was a previous victim. And not just any previous victim. It was the victim at the beginning. So Ryusuke starts seeing these dead women and boys everywhere. And guess who decides to show her lovely face in front of him? Oh, his distant lover Reishi, as she screams, love you to death. Ryusuke, now his health is declining, and Midori has realized it, and she's worried. She's asking him, are you okay? Please don't do this. You're being drawn into this. But Ryusuke's stubborn, and he's like, no, I'm going to do this until I can find this pretty boy and put an end to this. Despite Midori's warnings, he runs off anyway. But guess who he finally sees after all of this time? The pretty boy. So he takes no time and rushes after him. But to no avail. It's too foggy. He easily lost the pretty boy. He's been fighting this whole time to find this pretty boy, but lost him just like that. And before he knows it, he's in a certain area. Yes, that same dreaded area. The one that was in the center of the map. That was supposedly the start of all of this. Yes, he sees the pregnant woman. She's staring right at him. And a little bit of a side note, this actually is such a touching scene. You would not think about it your first time watching, but she isn't upset at him. He's crying and he's asking her for her forgiveness, that he is sorry and she is dead. But she has no anger. She simply raises her hand and points, guiding. Without saying a single word, she tells him, please save my niece. She is about to meet the same fate I did. Please don't let her die like I did. Please save her, Ryusuke. So he listens. That word, that sentence that was never said but just known just from the simple act of pointing one's finger, he darts down the road. And it shows Midori, and she's in his grasp. She turns around the corner to see the pretty boy, and an urge comes over her to ask him what about her love, but she knows what will come of that. So she tries to fight it, but she simply can't. Just as she raises her voice to ask the question, a familiar hand touches her shoulder. It's Ryusuke. He came just in time. And before they could notice anything, the fog was gone. The pretty boy was gone. Was it really over? Was that the end of it? Are all of these senseless deaths finally over? That's the question Junji leaves for us. It's your choice, your idea of what really happened. Very interesting story once you actually break it down. I wasn't too impressed at first, but when I did the research for this video, it really all fit together. Okay, on to the next story. Okay, finally moving on to the other story in this episode. It's called Slug Girl, and like I said earlier, it's only 16 pages, so this one went by very fast. And this was significantly different than the manga version, because they definitely kind of dwindled it down to fit it into the time frame. But okay, so the story starts off with this girl. Her name is Yuko, and she's having issues speaking. And her friend Ray is very worried about her because Yuko stops coming to school. So Ray decides to visit her friend Yuko at home, and after not getting anything from ringing the doorbell, she goes around back to see Yuko's parents stomping and throwing salt on slugs. Why are they doing that? Well, because the area where they're at is very damp, and not much sun reaches there, so it's a breeding land for slugs. Anyway, so they see that Ray's there, and Ray obviously wants to see her friends. So Yoko's mother takes her inside, and there is Yuko Now, in Japan, when you are sick, you typically wear a mask. It's very strange for Americans, but it's very common in Japan, and Yuko is wearing one of these masks. And this is where the anime and manga very much derive. Not much, but just a little bit. Yuko's obviously in distress to the point where she screams at both her mother and her best friend to leave her alone. Now, I'll tell you about the manga real quick and then go to the anime. The manga tells a little story about slugs that Yuko has always had a fear because one day her and her friends were playing at her house and one decided to throw a slug at her and it traumatized her, just like it would traumatize any young kid at that age. So it then skips to the following day and Rei decides to see Yoko again, so she stops by her house only to see Yoko's mother jumping out in fear, and Rei's obviously surprised. This is when Yoko comes out, and she opens her mouth to have a giant slug come out. The slug has replaced her tongue, and Yoko is obviously scared as it slithers and slimes all over her face. They don't know what is happening. And Yoko tries to ask them for help, but she can't say anything. Yoko even tried cutting the slug out. Now, in the anime, when they visited her in her bed, that's where it showed it, the slug coming out. And I will say the anime did a great job at that, though. They kicked off this hardcore bad A music, and it really set the tone. Great job with the music. Great job. Anyway, so Yoko's health is slowly diminishing as the slug essentially is almost like feeding off of her, and her parents don't know what to do. They try feeding her salt, but Yuko only refuses it as she can't even stand salt anymore. They decide to take drastic measures. So they decide to fill up the bathtub with salt and have their daughter bathe in it. That hopefully this could finally get rid of the slug. That finally their daughter could be back. So Yoko goes into the tub and her hair slowly disappears under the grains of salt. Yeah, time passes on and she doesn't come up. Her parents, very worried at this point, scream at Yoko, "Where are you? Answer me, what happened?" Only to get nothing. They panic. They reach into the sand trying to find her. But then her father feels a solid object. He grabbed her head, but when he pulled it out, there was no body. It was shriveled up to where she was only a head. They decided to do the only thing they thought that they could do. Get the salt off. Let's rinse her off. Yes, but unfortunately, all that did was give the slug more energy. It slithered out of the house with the head attached, just as a shell. The slug had metamorphized. The slug has transformed into a snail with the shell of a human head. Not able to do anything, her parents just decided to let it be, so Yuko got to spend the rest of her life in the backyard, and when anyone ever saw her, actually looked at her, they could see a glare, a piercing glare of sorrow. And that's where today's episode ends. I want to thank all of you for this time, and if you made it this far, please like, please subscribe. It would mean the world to me as I'm trying to make this channel grow. And I did say real quick, I have news. Big changes are happening to the channel. I got a lot in store and I'm trying to make my videos better every time. So yeah, pretty much thank you everyone. And this is going to be Kurokami and I'm signing off.